Home to the oldest rainforest and the tallest twin buildings in the world. With a population of 30 million and counting, Malaysia is a country that has developed far from its early origins. A nation of diverse ethnicity and a melting pot of cultures from the pages of history. Located along the Straits of Malacca, Malaysia has for hundreds of years been a centre of trade for shipping lanes from all over the world. It was this fact that also made Malaysia and Singapore of strategic importance in World War II. Long gone are the days of colonial rule. Malaysia has now grown into a fast-developing nation with a dynamic economy and infrastructure to accommodate the needs of a modern nation. It was, however, not always the case. Before being called Malaysia, Malaya was a British colony along with Singapore. The fight for independence of this nation began after the end of World War II, when the locals wanted a self-governing nation free from the British Crown. With local administrators and council of rulers seeking a peaceful way to reach independence, another armed movement was in the form of the Malayan Communist Party, or MCP, which sought to attain it by forcing the British out and installing a communist government. In 1948, with the killing of 3 European plantation managers, the movement became an all-out guerrilla-styled campaign against the British. This then became the Malayan Emergency. Part of the story is here in the town of Batu Pahat in Johor, Malaysia. Since the end of the emergency, Batu Pahat has grown to become a centre of manufacturing, education, and with a population of 500,000 and growing, it is now an important component for the development of the state and for Malaysia as a whole. In 1953, Batu Pahat was the scene of heavy fighting with the communist insurgents and a gathering of Commonwealth troops from various countries. Amongst them were troops from the small island nation of Fiji in the South Pacific. Fiji is an archipelago in the South Pacific, about 2,000 kilometres northwest of New Zealand's North Island. Made up of a diverse population of 860,000 inhabitants, with approximately 330 islands in total. This small collective of islands has a proud history of bearing fierce warriors. Its capital city of Suva has seen the departure of its fighting men going abroad to wherever they are needed, serving under the British Crown, and in recent years under the banner of the United Nations. In 1952, a small group of them departed its shores and boarded a ship bound for what was then pre-independence Malaya. Their mission was to join the collection of Commonwealth troops serving in the jungles of Malaya to combat communist insurgents in the hope of stopping the spread of communism, which was the predominant problem in Southeast Asia after the end of World War II.
I was a very young fellow at that time. I was only 11 when they went to Malaya for that campaign, and I remember the excitement of that move. The day that they left Fiji, they marched through the Suva to the wharf and the embarkation on the troop ship that was taking them to Malaya. That is what I remember as a child.
One such person in the Fijian group was Manoni Vavalagi Dale Tuakama Kora Vulavula, who was serving with the Fijian battalion in Malaya. He was 17 years old when he arrived. In 2013, he published a book called The Malayan Campaign. The book, which was launched by the Prime Minister of Fiji, tells his historical accounts when he served in the jungles of Malaya, based in the then small town of Batu Pahat. Keeping a diary with him since he arrived in 1953, his hope is that future generations of Fijians will remember the group of men who went to a foreign land and fought for the British Crown to combat communist insurgents in an accurate historical account.
It is important for me to store this information for my future generation, but they must be recorded accurately, and the time and the reason why this information is recorded. One thing I've been doing all along since 1953 is to keep my diary record. So I have stored facts in my, no one will ever dispute that. So what I want to do is, when I write, I make sure that I write the truth, so that my children will not be misled, so that they know what is the right thing to do. Our history, Fijian history, when I say Fijian, I'm talking about the indigenous Fijian, we never had any written history. So this would be the first time someone sits down and writes something.
We're known for that we provide good men in the field who do their work, who are professional, who can fit in with other troops. So for us, maintaining that standard, that's the challenge. You can be referred to as a warrior nation, but you've got to maintain that standard and keep on maintaining that thing. And that's hard work. But we've been successful in a sense. But the thing is, we have to keep on looking at our procedures, looking at what's changed in the area of operations, look at the improvements, look at our recruiting. But that's the thing. It's a constant look over, and then improve.
The call to arms began with a recruiting move that started in January 1951, gathering young men from villages and towns across the Fijian Islands. Traditions were followed as the request was conveyed to chiefs from all the major islands, stating that King George VI had requested a formation of a battalion for foreign service in the name of the king. Young, able bodies from all over volunteered. This was what differentiated the Fijians from most others. They enlisted with the wholehearted belief that they were serving their God, king, and country.
There was a popular saying that these fellows were recruited from the villages. They were recruited from the villages because they wanted to spread the participation of the Fijians to all the provinces of Fiji. So the country as a whole was involved. And they were able to do that with the Second World War and particularly with the Malayan.
Men started arriving in Suva from all the other islands, and their training was done at Camp Luvu-Luvu. The men, unaccustomed to military training and life, were to become a special, newly formed regiment to serve in Malaya. They were called the 1st Battalion Fiji Infantry Regiment, or 1FIR. Not that they knew where they would be deployed at the time. Prior to this, a request was made by Ratu Josefa Vanayaliali Sakuna to King George VI at Buckingham Palace in London. He presented a tabua, or whale's tooth, as a token of their friendship and asked if the king would accord the Fijian troops the same treatment as other British troops by his royal assent. This meant that the Fijian troops were to be viewed as equals to their British counterparts in all aspects. This request was accepted and later became apparent when the troops reached Malaya. Leaving the port of Suva, Fiji, on 8 January 1952, Manu was one of the men that left on the SS Usturies. As the troops gathered at this same point in Suva, they marched to the port where a ship was waiting for them to embark on an unknown journey to a foreign land. A sizable crowd gathered to bid them farewell, so much so that it was difficult to board the ship. Some of the men shed tears of farewell and waved from the decks of the ships to their families. Only a day after being on board the ship were they told where they were going. They were informed by their commanding officer that they were bound for Malaya to serve with other Commonwealth troops to combat the communist insurgents there. Their port of call, after setting sail for 11 days, would be Singapore. In 2015, 3 members of 1FIR, including Manu, came back to Batu Pahat and showed an amazing recollection of what they went through in the Malayan Emergency more than 60 years ago.
When we left, we were not told that we were coming to Malaya. They told us that you are going to an area where your services will be needed. And only during the first parade we had on board the ship, SS Asturias, they told us that we are going to Malaya. And we never knew where Malaya was. No idea. So we said, well, we'll go to Malaya. Then the first thing that happened, we have to land, got off at Singapore. But before we reached Singapore, we couldn't stand the smell of rubber. We could smell it miles and miles away out in the sea. And one of our friends stood up and, how come? They said it is a foreign country, because our expectation of a foreign country is everything fresh and not smelly like what we had. Of course, that was the rubber. We're not used to the smell of rubber. See?
Malaya post-World War II returned to British rule. During this time, the British were still trying to repair Malaya's economy by driving the tin and rubber industries, which was also a much-needed commodity in post-war England. Severely affected by unemployment, low wages and high-level inflation after the war, it took several years before the British were able to stabilise the country, but not before the Malayan Communist Party, or MCP, which was then organised into the Malayan Races Liberation Army, or Malayan People's Liberation Army, came to existence. Effectively, however, they were the same. Their cause was justified by them to attain liberation from British rule and to create a communist government. In June 1948, the MCP killed 3 European plantation managers in Sungai Siput, Perak. This was viewed by the British as an act of war by the communists, and the ensuing years became known as the Malayan Emergency. With supporters to their cause roughly estimated at 500,000 out of the 3.12 million Chinese population in Malaya at the time. Support from other races and the predominant Malays were far lower. Effectively, however, only about 4,000 to 5,000 were considered armed fighters in the beginning.
A lot of lessons to be learned from the emergency. We were not really prepared, and in fact, fortunately, we were still under the British. If it was not because of the British or other Commonwealth countries in our country, we will be taken over by the socialist communist guerrillas or regime, and maybe, unfortunately, we might have been turned into socialist communist states of Malaya. But we were fortunate, and I think that is lesson learned, that we are having a big brother that is our British and their counterparts. We have to struggle to fight the socialist communist or the MCP, Malayan Communist Party, and finally we defeated them and they failed to take over Malaya. At that time we were not prepared at all. We don't even have our own soldier, except for the Battalion 1 and Battalion 2 of Askar Melayu, which was formed by the British, and then it added on. Then later on there were a lot of Malay villagers recruited to be Special Constable, SC, Jungle Scout, or the Malay States Volunteer Reserve. Quite a number of them and joined because of that emergency. Everybody was prepared to go to wear uniform, to carry arms and to fight against the communists. But still, it takes a long time for us to defeat the communists, the Communist Party.
The term emergency was used instead of war, surprisingly due to an insurance technicality, as the term war would mean that losses suffered would not be covered. By the end of 1948, the MCP, acting under the directive of Soviet communists and their global strategy, started an offensive campaign throughout Malaya. Recognizing this as a regional threat under the communist domino doctrine, the British initiated emergency laws which enabled the police to imprison without trial communist insurgents and their accomplices.
There was a film Negara, they will always come to the village and they show a documentary on the bad things about the communists. Sometimes it gives you a nightmare when they show the torture and the burning of houses by the communists. And also I remember in Greek, traveling from Greek to Kuala Kangsar, it's always a common sense to have a car, to have a bus loaded with people burned by the communists, and they just leave the people there. No harm done to the people, but they burn the bus. Anytime those communists will ambush you anywhere. Sometimes we hear the shooting not far away from our home. So it was really frightening at that time.
At the start of the Malaya campaign, the British had 13 infantry battalions in Malaya, made up of British, Gurkhas and 2 Royal Malay regiments. It was deemed too small to deal with the threat of the insurgents, hence additional troops were brought in from the rest of the Commonwealth, which then included the men of the 1st Battalion Fijian Infantry Regiment.
We left Fiji on the 8th of January 1952, and we arrived in Singapore on the 19th of January 1952. 11 days, 11 nights, continuous sailing. Then when we arrived, we went and based at Nisun Garrison for familiarization on the kind of weapons that we are supplied with. Then after 3 months or 2.5 months, we were then moved to Ultiram across the causeway to Johor State. We based in Ultiram for about 3 months. Then we move into the operations area. The operations area, our first operations area is in Negeri Sembilan in the town of Bahau.
The war in Malaya became a guerrilla-styled confrontation. This was based on the training that the MCP secretly received from the British when the Communist Party were involved in fighting the Japanese in World War II. This is when most of them developed a strong sense of kinship between them.
The battalion headquarters of the Fijian Infantry Regiment was located or based in here, Batu Pahat. And the fighting companies were spread out, Yongpeng, Labis, and Mua. They are in the operations area. And we get our ration from Kluang and Batu Pahat, dry ration, not dry ration, fresh ration.
In 1951, the British began their Hearts and Minds campaign. This was a further part of the Briggs Plan.
Yongpeng was a notorious area, a very dangerous area. General Templar asked the battalion, commander, to bring the battalion back to Yongpeng. That time, we were at Negeri Sembilan in Bahau. He wanted the battalion, the Fiji battalion, to come. No any other battalion to come here. Now, because of his faith, he believed that only the Fiji battalion could combat the strength of the communist terrorists that were creating a lot of problems for the people here. The enemies and the people in the villages, kampong, they are the same people. You can't tell which one is the enemy. This is the most dangerous thing because they could be taking out information to the enemy without you knowing. It is a different feeling because, you know, as you can hear, commercial vehicles coming up and down, up and down. It doesn't give you the creeps like before when you know the enemy are peeping from somewhere.
The brig's plan was to cut off the insurgents from the supply of food and support from the rural population. He recognized that it was the terrain of Malaya that made combating the insurgents difficult due to heavy jungles and the spread out squatter communities near the jungle fringes. One aspect of the plan was the forced relocation of settlers into new villages which were guarded by the police. It involved moving 500,000 rural Malayans, of which some 400,000 were of Chinese ethnicity. These new villages still exist today, but are obviously no longer guarded and have developed into large towns.
They relocate the Chinese quarters into one small community, but then they were later on more advanced than the Malay villages. The Chinese new villages at that time, 1950, 60, already got their electric supply or water supply, whereas the Malay villages were being left behind. Only mid-60s or towards 70s only we get the electricity and the water supply. They were more advanced economically, infrastructure-wise. The Malays perceive the Chinese, the townspeople, as friends. Those people, the shopkeepers, people in towns, as friendly people. They are not sympathetic with the communists. The Malays consider the communists as a different group of people altogether, and they understand that most communist Chinese, whom they are familiar with, the shopkeeper, they don't support the communists. The perception was that Malay, Chinese, they are living together harmoniously, cordial, but that is another group, a third group, whom even the Chinese do not want to associate, or the Indians do not want to associate with those communists. So it was a harmonious life, and there was no inter-ethnic conflict or problem whatsoever between the Malays and the Chinese in the local context.
With the killing of the British High Commissioner Sir Henry Gurney on 6 October 1951, most of the population in Malaya then rejected the Communist Party's cause. What the MCP did not realise was that most Malayans then still liked the British, and though they sought independence, it was not through violence that they wished for that to happen. In 1952, Sir Gerald Templar became the commander of British forces in Malaya. It was during this time that the Fijians arrived in Malaya as part of an organised Commonwealth army combating the insurgents. Sir Gerald Templar was credited in having an astounding success with his tactics.
In 1952, the Fijian Regiment arrived in Batu Pahat. That was the first time the Batu Pahat people have ever seen Fijians. Well, they were a little bit bewildered. Why? Because when the Fijian soldiers were walking around the town, they were wearing the skirt like what we call the Sulu. So they looked very, out of the ordinary. Then when the Fijians came to Batu Pahat, we were very happy because they are helping to keep our town peaceful and safe.
This high school is very special to us because this is where we have our parade, everything. Training, our athletes, we have some good athletes here. We represent the state of Johor.
Fijians were very active in rugby as well as athletics. But they also had, one member of the troops called Rodro, who was a very good boxer. And he used to fight at the light heavyweight division. And he was a captain of the rugby team. Their rugby was so fantastic that the young Malaysians were all captivated because they used to run a lot. Unlike the days when the British used to play rugby, they would depend on kicks to touch to move forward. But the Fijians used to run, and they used sprinters. And two of the top sprinters in this country at that time were Joe Levula and his brother Emosil Levula. They both played rugby. And even The names like Rokoa, Mukunabitu were all very famous because they were such outstanding rugby players. And as I said to many people, in the early 50s, when our country met Thailand, we never used to be able to beat Thailand in rugby. But at that time, when we fielded 6 Fijian players, we beat Thailand 49-0. And this person called Naindoli, who was an excellent athlete, scored 6 tries. So people were so fascinated by the Fijians in rugby, the Africans in athletics. All the long distances were dominated by them. Troops that came in were all very involved in sports. And to us, the emergency meant the peak of sport activities in Malaysian history.
Now, when I was there, back in the 50s, we used to come around this place. They used to tell us this is the Malacca Strait. Actually, it all depends whoever is here. We don't have this beautiful thing before, no. We don't have this. We just know this is Malacca Strait and we go straight back to Batu Pahat. Whenever we come here, it reminds us of Fiji, beautiful place. Get back in the truck and go back to Batu Pahat. It's very nice for us. At the same time, it's very emotional too. Most of us over here with that gone. Sacrificed their life and time to come here. To have our brothers and sisters in Malaya at that time, now Malaysia. That time is now, it gives you sort of feeling. It's only natural. But I tell you, it's a very nice place, very nice sport here. It all reminds us.
Batu Pahat has changed completely from what we saw when we first landed here. Way back in 1952, this is a town, a center of town. It is now, I think, a city. And a lot of people here, we never expected them to be around. And so many buildings. And the town has expanded a lot. And we are very happy that we given an opportunity to come back and see Batu Pahat again.
The war for them spanned 4.5 years. It was a collection of experiences that none of them could ever have imagined. The Fijian troops were a feared component of the Commonwealth Army. Citing high praise from General Templar and all other branches of the military, the service of the Fijians was invaluable to the Malayan Emergency. On numerous occasions, the Fijians proved themselves as worthy soldiers, establishing a good reputation with comrades from other nations and especially with the locals. The local press and civilians looked highly upon the Fijians with their achievements in combat, sport, and most importantly, a friendship that developed between the two nations.
Where we're standing now is Maury Beach. Maury Beach was the camp of the Sea Company in 1954. Right here was where my tent was. My tent. We had small tents, 2 persons, 1 tent. And my friend was with me, his name was Gregory Suku. He was our mechanic. And it so happened, at night, we sit here, moonlight, and we see the boat going towards this way, the Malacca Strait. Our troops were all in Batu Pahat. The enemy that we were supposed to attack, this would be an ideal strategic location. All of us who came here, we felt at home because, well, the sea is there. Not the jungle, it's the sea. We felt at home, see. I think the best camp we had was this one. Yeah. What we did, not so much the patrol, it's the support that we give to the combined operation, because they go and bomb and the ships standing out there, then shooting, and attacked here. That kind of operations.
Nakana mataningau na. Nimam sa tosui bikau mesaki mu bitar tarvatirna.
One of my recollections that I have on my involvement during the emergency campaign, it was when we had to go through the thick bushes. It was not easy because of the forest. No one had ever gone through this forest, and here we are. We had to go through, and we had to meet new parasites like blood-sucking leeches, wild elephants, even wild monkeys. Here we are at the bottom, and we have these wild monkeys throwing down things at us. Then at the same time, we had the enemy from every angle. And what surprised the enemy was when they shot at us, we did not hesitate. We ran towards where the shooting was coming from, and we shouted and yelled. This is what had surprised the enemy. Something they had not expected of us.
Once we were in a helicopter and we were being offloaded onto uncleared land. We had to jump out using parachutes. Our leader then was Sergeant Lucas, who had instructed us on what to do once you land. Unfortunately, one of us got stuck in the trees, but somehow we managed to get him out. See, this was a new thing for us. Especially, we were not told of what to expect as we came into this campaign. Once we were asked to take a walk in search of the enemy, and our leader, Ratu William, asked us to cross one of the longest swamps, and in the morning, we crossed this swamp at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Come 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were still in the middle of the swamp, and we had not even reached the other side of the swamp. It was prohibited then to be on land after 6 in the evening. So we could not do anything else, so we just had to remain in the swamp the whole night from 4 o'clock in the evening to 6 o'clock in the next morning. In the cold and all the other elements that came with the cold whilst in the swamp. At 6 o'clock in the morning, we had to come out and we continued with our journey.
There is one thing that I recall about my service there in Malaya. Once, when I was sent to escort the scout car to Singapore, and on the way, it slid into a rice field. I was inside with my driver, and we got stuck. In this period, I had tried to open the door. As much as I tried to open the door, it was so difficult because of the mud it was getting into the car. So I kicked it open, and somehow, miraculously, we managed to get out of the car, my driver and I. And that was one incident which has never been erased from my mind, because that was the moment that I nearly lost my life.
I was based there in Yongpeng in B Company, and one thing I could recall was that we were ambushed and 8 of my colleagues were killed. And from that, we had to be relocated to some other places apart from the other teams that had remained in our place called Kota Tinggi, the original place we were based at.
The most fearful thing I faced when I was in Malaya, there were 2 things. One was the death of Sergeant Wara. Secondly, there was this one time we were in a village and the 6 of us had an encounter with 35 soldiers hiding behind the trees with all their weapons and arms they had against us. We just had one machine gun with us. It was a bit faulty then. It was a Bren gun. It was a bit faulty, and somehow it just got damaged along the way. Somehow, miraculously, we managed to overcome these 35 soldiers, and we chased them into the bushes. We had to bring dogs to come and smell the scent of the enemy. The dogs went up to the river, and it was from the river that the scent had disappeared. We could not identify where the enemies were.
This is where our company, C Company, came to look for the enemies who killed one of our big company sergeants, Sergeant Wara. When we arrived here, we got off on the road and we walked towards this was a swamp before. I could hear the shooting. I thought they've shot the enemies, but it was the other way around. And the one that got hurt very badly was Samu. Then we carried him here and put him in the jeep. The blood was shooting on. I took off my shirt. I had only my short. Took off my shirt, then I tied it here, see if I can stop or reduce the flow of blood. And when we arrived here, it was an emotional feeling, personally for me, when I saw 20 English soldiers standing by with their shirts off, getting ready. They're all ready to give blood, to donate their blood. So momentarily I realized a human being is just one. It's just the language and the skin. That is where we differ. The medical orderlies and the doctors, they rush out and took him straight away to the theater and worked on him. So I felt very relieved that I've handed over the injured person or the wounded person to the medical authorities, and I went back, drove back to Yongpeng from here.
On September 8, 1955, the government of the Federation of Malaya offered an amnesty to the communist insurgents. As chief minister at the time, Tunku Abdul Rahman, who was later to become Malaya's first prime minister, offered it with specific terms, but insisted that there be no negotiations with the MNLA with regards to the terms. It was by all accounts a good offer, stating that those that surrendered would not be prosecuted for their activities during the emergency. A ceasefire was not in effect, but authorities would accept surrenders. Anyone that surrendered would be investigated, and if found to be no longer a threat, they would be helped to regain their position in society and their families. An offer of consideration was also made to those who did not agree to the government but wished to return or relocate to China. But the Communist Party did not accept the terms given. No further offers were given until talks resumed in December 1955, which became known as the Baling Talks. The talks failed, but it led to further negotiations in time, and by 1957 most areas in Malaya were declared white areas, which meant it was free from communist activities. The pressure of fighting a war and securing supplies was a losing battle for the communists. Malaya became an independent nation on 31st August 1957. The communist insurgents were still active, but in a very much lower capacity than before. Once independent, the communist movement became less attractive to even the supporters, as the main goal was to attain independence from the British. When this was achieved, it gave little excuse to them to continue the insurgency in the eyes of their supporters. By 1959, the communist movement were only active around the Thai border, a far cry from its peak numbers of 8,000 men in years before. Officially, however, the emergency was only declared over in 1960. In the 4 years of Fijian involvement from 1952 to 1956, some 1,600 Fijian troops served in Malaya. 25 Fijian troops died in combat in Malaya. The first Prime Minister of Malaya, Tunku Abdul Rahman, became a friend and mentor to Ratu Sir Edward Kakobau, who was a commander of the Fijian battalion, and who later went on to become the Deputy Prime Minister of Fiji, and whose son, Brigadier General Ratu Epeli, is the former President of Fiji. The Fijian troops that served in Malaya during the emergency returned to Fiji in 1956. They were met by their friends and families who were waiting for them, and a celebration was held to commemorate their return. It was held with full military traditions combined with the local traditions. Their return was a joyous moment, but having been away for so long, most of them had developed lifelong friendships with their colleagues. Travelling home to their distant towns and villages throughout the Fijian Islands, they were presented with a set of clothes, a set of cutlery, a hoe and a machete. This was what they received for their services in the hopes of starting a new life afterwards. There is a popular song in Fiji called Bula Malaya, which was written at the time the Fijians served in Malaya. A testament to the close friendship the two nations have that are told by the stories of those who served here. Those that returned to Fiji and those that gave their lives for the struggle against the communist. This close friendship will forever be a part of the two nations' history. Both nations are now independent and free to choose what the future brings by themselves. The story of the men who served in the one FIR is a memory that is preserved in time. These men coming back to Batu Pahat shows that even through the toughest of times, good things do become a reality, and that nations even far apart can indeed be close in our minds in hopes of creating a better future for all coming generations.